Thank you, everybody, for coming. My name is Elia Molinari. I'm a project specialist at Eco Canada, and I'd like to extend a thank you for everybody attending Eco Impact and this session in particular as well. And we're gonna kind of get into it. Our schedule started a little bit late, so we're trying to catch up on time here and there. This session is going to be the Canadian Youth Strategy, Youth Success Strategy, and the role we all have to play. And our speaker today is Dr. Jennifer Crowson, a Diversity and Inclusion Specialist and a Youth Success Strategy at the Ontario Disability Employment Network. Dr. Crowson holds a Bachelor and a Master of Social Work from McMaster University and a PhD from the University of Edinburgh. She has over 25 years in experience practice, policy, and research in the field of child welfare, social justice, and disability. She currently works at the Diversity and Inclusion Specialist with the Ontario Disability and Employment Network, and is also a part-time sessional instructor with the School of Social Work at McMaster University. Jennifer is currently a chair of the board of directors of the Canadian Down Syndrome Society, and she's the parent advisor of the advisory committee for CanChild at McMaster University. Her work is guided by social justice and a strong desire for positive impact, to positively impact the lives of people who have disabilities. So without any further ado, Dr. Crowson.
Thank you, and thank you. And yep, this works. So thank you very much for that kind introduction, and also thank you to Eco Canada for having us here. You know, this is a different audience to who I normally speak to, so it really is a pleasure and really a privilege. So thank you for coming, and I appreciate your ears for the next hour that we are together, because I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about youth, and in particular youth who have developmental and/or intellectual disabilities, and what we could all do in order to support those youth for a future that might include employment. And that's what brings me here today, because this is a workforce conference, and here's a sector where perhaps these youth may have a contribution to make. So I guess the question is that I would leave you with is, what role might you have in helping prepare those young people for that future? So I'm going to speak to a project that I've been involved in Ontario, but we have taken it across Canada, called the Youth Success Strategy. So there we go, there's me. So the Youth Success Strategy, you've heard a little bit about me. My kind of my passion really comes from my son. You'll see that I have 3 children, but my youngest son has Down syndrome. So he really was the driving force behind me sort of moving into this field of disability. His name's Owen. He's a fabulous little guy. So who are ODEN? So ODEN is an Ontario-based. Is there anybody here from Ontario? Fantastic. I'm also from Ontario. Ontario, it's a network of employment service providers, and we exist to sort of support the capacity building within the employment service sector, but also in terms of businesses. We do work with businesses around providing disability and awareness confidence training, and I'm going to get to that QR code, which I handed out to you earlier, which would be an opportunity for yourselves, excuse me, to take part in some disability and awareness confidence training. We have about over 130 member agencies across the province of Ontario, but we also do work outside of Ontario, which is one of the projects that I've been working on and I'm going to speak to. I want to start us off just with a video just to kind of get us going, probably tapping your feet. You're going to recognize the singer here, but also just for a little bit of inspiration, because we all know that, you know, inclusion needs visibility. We need to see people who have disabilities in employment, and this video is going to help us a little bit with that. So, I press.
The pink eyed Simone, and everybody saw that she could do the job. Oh, I went to the baker and saw Simone.
visibility matters, but there's a lot of other things that matter, and that's what I'm going to dive into a little bit here this morning with you. So I had a look at, your sector, because that is obviously why we're all here today. And certainly from what I saw in the statistics, is that there is a shortage. There's a workforce shortage in this sector. That there's a forecast of over 170,000 net environmental jobs opening by 2025, because of the sector growth and retirements. So obviously, I am not up here to suggest, that there's going to be there are levels of skill and there are levels of ability that exist within the disability community which may be able to fulfill some of these workforce needs that we have in your community. And so how might we begin to sort of promote that in an earlier stage is really what I'm interested in. I want to give you a quote here from a young woman in Ontario, and she talks about the value of work. I mean, we all go to work because we have a passion about our work, we want a paycheck, we feel good about ourselves, we socialize with others. Well, those reasons exist also for people who have disabilities. So Sarah talks about how work means to me that I'm already starting to accomplish some of my life goals. I enjoy being able to make decisions about what I spend my money on. And I enjoyed working where so many other students also have part-time jobs. So you can see from this quote that she's getting out of work those same things that probably you and I get out of when we go to work. So what did we do about this? Back in 2021, there's normally a picture here which isn't showing, but that's okay. It's not really that relevant. But in 2021, ODEN did a piece of research which led to us creating a series of webinars. And those webinars were around, one was called Raising Expectations, which was geared towards parents and caregivers and educators of school-aged children. And that second webinar was based towards high school-aged and transition-aged youth who were heading into the workforce or heading into adult life. And that was called Employment, the Gold Standard for Inclusion. And we delivered this to over 660 people in Ontario, including parents, educators, employment service providers, and businesses. We did that obviously online because this was sort of during and throughout the pandemic. I'm going to speak to you a little bit about what that research was, because the research was important, and I had the pleasure of doing the research for ODEN. And what did the research told us? It told us several key things. The first thing is that attitudes from parents, caregivers, professionals matter. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is if we as parents, for example, if I can bring it back to that level, don't have an expectation that employment is going to be in our child's future, we're not necessarily beginning to prepare them for that. I don't know any of us here in the room who are parents, but we're probably talking to our kids about what are you going to do when you leave school? What do you need to do in order to prepare yourself for a future that includes a job? What we were finding is that those conversations that were not necessarily happening amongst those who had a child with a developmental disability because they just weren't seeing that as part of their future. We were also learning that youth were leaving high school, youth with developmental disabilities or other disabilities were leaving high school with not the same skill set as their peers, so that they were leaving with, things, they didn't have the necessary soft skills that we talk about as being important for employment. So showing up for work on time, what to wear to work, how to communicate with colleagues, how to be part of a team. And they weren't leaving school with those skills that are harder to teach. You can teach somebody how to do a job, but you can't always teach a young person how to do those kinds of things. We also heard very, very clearly that those youth who were provided with supported co-op and experiential learning experiences during high school and beyond, so after-school jobs, summer jobs, they were better prepared for employment. And that is probably not rocket science to anybody here in this room. However, those youth with disabilities were not being given the same access to those experiences. So they weren't leaving high school with that under their belt because they were perhaps heading towards a future that didn't include employment. What did we hear? We also heard that partnerships make a difference. So what kind of partnerships am I talking about here? I'm talking about those between schools and parents, but I'm also talking about between employment service providers, schools, and businesses. And that's where businesses becomes an important part of the equation, industry, that they need to be part of this conversation and part of this dialogue around giving experiences to young people. The other thing we heard, and I'm pretty passionate about, I have to tell you, is this whole question of literacy and numeracy as being important. Now, I don't want to make any assumptions about who's in the room, but if anybody in this room has a person in their life who has a disability, particularly a developmental disability, you will probably agree with me when I say there's this assumption that they might not necessarily read, or it's not that important. Well, it is important, and it is possible. It just might look different for those young people. Their levels of literacy might look different, but they should not be leaving the school system without some access to literacy at their level. And we find that really important because that becomes important in a place, in a job, right? In terms of being able to follow sort of basic instructions, even if those instructions are pictures on the wall, right? Like thinking outside the box there. They need to be able to have exposure to these experiences in order to help them when they are perhaps at an age where they could be employed. So what did we do with all of that? I told you we developed those webinars, and we presented them to many parents, caregivers, and schools in Ontario. We then kind of collapsed the two webinars, the one for younger age and the one for high school age, into one workshop. And we applied to CASE, who are your title sponsor, I believe, for this conference, the Canadian Association for Supported Employment. We applied to their Innovation Lab. This is the symbol for their Innovation Lab. And we applied to them for funding in order to further this project and to kind of take it on the road across Canada. And we were successful in getting a grant in order to do that. So what did we do? We created the Canadian Youth Success Strategy. We went from the Youth Success Strategy to the Canadian Youth Success Strategy. And our vision for the Canadian Youth Success Strategy is that all youth in Canada who have an intellectual and/or developmental disability are prepared and supported for a future that includes meaningful employment. So what were the goals of the Canadian Youth Success Strategy? Well, one was that we would create a public awareness, that we would bring public awareness and education to the need for something like this. And that talked about the inclusion of young people who have developmental disabilities in the workforce. The second thing is we wanted to support this idea of how youth transition from the high school system into employment, and what might that look like, and how can we best support that. The third thing we wanted to do was we wanted to support strategies that reach traditionally underserved populations, such as those in the north, or who may have a minority language, or who may be from Indigenous communities, and who are facing additional barriers to employment, not just that issue of disability. And the other thing is we wanted to raise the profile of supported employment services, and that's who CASE are, or who CASE is the organization that represents employment service providers here and it's up there, look at that. Fancy that. Okay, so what did our project look like? So there were 3 components to our project. One was we trained organizations on how to deliver that webinar I was talking about. And that webinar really speaks to this idea of, and it's directed towards parents and educators, about how you've got to raise your expectations for your young person's future, and you've got to start at a very young age, and that this should start at home. And part of what happens in that webinar is we really speak to the narrative, the very negative narrative that surrounds the lives of people who have developmental disabilities, which often can really interfere with a parent having those expectations for their child's future. And what I mean by that comes very much from personal experience, because I can tell you that when I was pregnant with my own son, I was told to lower my expectations for his future. I was basically told he would probably live with me forever, and he will probably never have a job, and he will probably never read. Well, I can tell you, I don't mind if he lives with me forever because I love him, but he can read, and he will have a job. So I can tell you, but when parents hear those things, they start to believe those things about their child's future, and it makes them very hard for them to think outside of that box. So we wanted to develop a webinar that would help to change those mindsets that were influencing those children's experiences, early experiences at home. We then wanted to work with employment agencies in order to provide them with a curriculum that could help to build up some of those employment skills that I was talking about, in terms of the ability to talk about yourself, in terms of the ability to be part of a team, that would allow these young people to leave the school system, or if they were the employment service providers or the school system can use this curriculum, and it's called Job Path, in order to help building those skills for the young people. The third part of the project, and that's really what kind of brings me here today, is this whole focus on businesses. Where we wanted to be able to work with the businesses in the communities that we were taking this project to, in order to say, hey, have you thought about this population of young people? Have you thought about what you could perhaps offer them? Co-ops, after-school jobs, summer jobs. Are you looking at young people who have developmental disabilities as an opportunity for this? So what we did is we offered the DACT training, which is the Disability and Awareness Confidence Training, which is something that ODEN, lots of organizations have programs like this developed, but ODEN has one that is an online program. We also offer in-person training on that, but we also have an online option, which you've all been given a QR code for today, and I'll explain that a little bit later in the presentation. But what we wanted to do was come at it from those three angles, that research was telling us was really important, that we needed to look at this not just as, from one silo. We needed to look at all three, if you like. So I got to go on the road. This was the exciting thing about this project. And I'll be able to add Alberta to the conversation. But, we went to Victoria, we went to Winnipeg, the Museum of Human Rights, and if you haven't been there, it is fabulous. I recommend you go there. I managed to visit that when I was there. And then, of course, most people will recognize Peggy's Cove. So we took the project to those three provinces as part of our case an innovation lab grant that we had. These were our partners in the three different provinces that we worked with. I won't read them out to you, but these were the partners that we worked with and that we trained on the family workshop, we trained on Job Path, and we worked with them to liaise with businesses in their community in order to get them access to the Disability and Awareness Confidence Training, with the goal of those businesses hiring youth who have developmental disabilities. So, as I said, we trained 6 organizations in order to deliver the family workshop. We did, I went there in person. We did a 3-hour interactive training with them where I walked them through how to deliver this workshop. We left them with a facilitator guide on how to deliver the workshop. We gave them the PowerPoint. We gave them all that they would need, all the tools that they would need in order to deliver these workshops. And this is an example. I think the next slide is the one that kind of shows you, it walks you, you can't really see it, so my apologies for it being so small, but I can certainly show people, but it shows you what the presentation looks like, what that family workshop presentation looks like. And I call it a family workshop, but I do want to point out to you that we did this presentation for educators, for people working in the school system, and it was just as impactful. I think it was very helpful for educators to hear the same messages that we were giving parents, and for parents to hear the same messages that we were giving educators in communities. This is this shows you what the facilitator workshop guide looks like. So it basically helped them exactly how to set up their presentation, how to run through each slide when they were delivering it. So hopefully we were leaving them with all of the tools that they needed in order to present this workshop in their community. So just, by way of example, this is the signia of Aspen Winds, which is a small French-speaking group in Manitoba who we did the training with. They have been able to deliver the family workshop. I believe they've done 2 in English and 1 in French. Because we had all the materials translated in French and English so that it could be delivered in both languages. And this was some of the feedback that we received, that it was really helpful the way that we focused on strengths and not deficits, and this idea of needing to change mentality with regard to employment. And everybody should be given an opportunity. So we were really pleased with some of the feedback that was received from the delivery of these workshops in that community. This is one of my favorite quotes, I have to tell you, because this really gets at the heart of some of what I'm saying, is the hope of one principal through this workshop is to encourage teachers and special education educators to review their practices regarding unpaid job placements for students with disabilities. Yes, cheers to that, right? Because we often hear that they're very limited, very, very limited, and often in the school cafeteria, which is not the real world, right? So we need to be giving these opportunities for our young people, perhaps in your industry. In terms of employment service providers, that second pillar of the project, we trained 9 employment service providers in the communities where we were having them trained on the workshop. We train them on Job Path, which is a ready-to-use curriculum to support the employability skill development in young people who have disabilities. It can be used in school settings or by employment service providers. So just again, by way of case example, DashWorks is the organization we worked with in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and they have fully adopted, the use of the Job Path into their program, and have done a really great job of integrating it into the work that they provide. So they run a program, an employment program within their organization, and this program, they described how it helped develop sort of work, like skills based on the young person's interest, but it didn't necessarily develop those softer employment skills that I was talking about. And so this marriage of bringing the Job Path into their environment, into this program, they thought was just fabulous, and it's worked out really well for them. So that's exciting to hear. We also have made available 100 DACT licenses to support businesses in the pilot communities. It's an online course that supports businesses in your evolving understanding of disability and how to hire more inclusively. So each of you, and those of you who didn't get it, I do have flyers where there's a QR code that would allow you access to that 1-hour training on the DACT, the Disability and Awareness Confidence Training. So I do encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity. This is something that is going to be available to you between now and the end of July using that QR code. And it's a real excellent resource, and if you're kind of new to thinking about disability within your workplace, I think it's a really good opportunity for you. There's what it looks like, I guess the front page in terms of the training, and it's a module by module. This is an example of, I tried to pull out examples from things that have happened across the country as a result of our project. This is a reverse job fair that happened in Nova Scotia with one of our partners through Job Junction, where they held a reverse job fair in terms of having businesses present, and they were able to use that as an opportunity to advertise access to the DACT, the Disability and Awareness Confidence Training, which was fabulous. There's the group code again. For you, the group code that you might use if you're going to log on to do it today is the DACT 2024. But you have that on there. The other thing that we've done is we have not translated, that's the wrong word, but we have put the workshop, that Train the Trainer workshop, on employment, the gold standard for inclusion. We've created an online learning module for that. So now anybody can access that module, and anybody could train themselves on how to deliver this workshop in their community. And we would support anybody who's interested in doing that. So if you were interested in doing this, if this makes any sense for the roles that you're in, I'm very, very happy to talk to you about what that might look like after the presentation. But that is an LMS module that's now available for free of charge, and again, has been part of this project for us. So I come to my last slide, but I do want to also say that we're now in year 2 of the Canadian Youth Success Project. Again, we were successful in getting an additional year of funding from CASE, from the Innovation Lab, which we're very, very grateful for. So what we're doing with this second year of funding is we are working with the YMCA in Toronto, the Greater Toronto Area, and we're training 6 of their regional offices on how to deliver this workshop that I'm talking about. We're also developing 3 additional modules to support the job path, because one of the things we found as we started to get into the job path, and I'm sure everybody will be familiar with, things change, right, and things evolve, and you can sometimes see that something that may have been developed 5 or 6 years ago, there's things missing, there's things that we could do in order to enhance that. We found that there were a couple of things missing. One, we wanted to create a module on thinking about intersectional barriers to employment, that it's not just about disability. We know that there are many, many other barriers that exist for young people who have disabilities. It could be related to their culture, it could be related to their ethnicity, it could be related to their race. And I was finding, certainly when I was out delivering these workshops, is I was getting some really interesting questions from parents and from families, who maybe didn't hold the same, belief or have the same experience of disability that, for example, I may have had. So really needing to make sure whoever's delivering this workshop is very aware and sensitive to those differences that might be in the room, and how do we have this conversation in a way that's inclusive to everybody who's present. So that's one of the modules. The other module is going to be looking at how do we think about entrepreneurial or social enterprise experiences as an employment experience for a young person with developmental disabilities. And the other one is looking at rural communities and how that might look different, particularly where transportation might be an issue. There are different things that might get in the way of the experiences of a young person. And again, I don't know what that might look like in your sector, but I would be very interested, very, very interested to learn. So I just want to sum up by saying, thank you, because, I do appreciate this is probably a little outside of the box of what you normally do. But I encourage you to think about, in the roles that you have, the different roles that you have in your sector, what are we doing in order to think about the role that young people who have developmental or intellectual disabilities, what role might they have in our industry, and how might we be part of creating opportunities for them at this stage. And like I said, experiential learning, co-ops, internships, summer jobs. There are things that can help these young people develop their interests and their skills. And I encourage you to think about what role you might have in that. So I will leave you with that we all have a role to play, as was the title, I think, of this workshop, that we all have a role to play. And I do thank you for your time this morning, and I welcome questions. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was very insightful. I think everybody here can agree. I met Dr. Croson about a year ago, and after doing Coast to Coast, I'm very happy to see that she has the same passion and hasn't lost any type of spark from a year ago. And I bet there's a lot of work and a lot of motivation behind it. So I greatly appreciate you coming here and speaking. I think one element that stood out to me was how you spoke about like family, and how there is, when I think about like support that can be given to people who experience a disability, you always start thinking about like school, and you start thinking about like employment, and you never really think about actually the expectations that are set, and like the information that like those parents most of the time that don't have the experience that you have and the passion that you have, and sometimes they find themselves with something that they don't really know how to handle. So what the information that they receive from outside and whoever the experts are supposed to be, very much so can shape that. So that was very insightful in my opinion. I don't know if anybody has any questions. The floor is going to be open.
I could be last because probably someone else will ask. So as an employer, and I probably don't even need this because I scream, but as an employer, and I'm interested in getting, adding diversity and inclusion more fully in my workforce, what is my first step? I take the DACT training, and then would that help connect me to people in my community that would be able, like service providers or?
Yeah, I think so. Now, the DACT isn't, thank you for that question. The DACT isn't going to, because again, I'm not sure where people are situated. The DACT is a general training course on, what is disability and what are the kinds of different disabilities people have, what are some obligations that employers have around accommodations, what is some of the legal framework around hiring inclusively and how and the kind of how to do that. This particular DACT is a 1-hour kind of introductory overview. There are different deeper dives that one could take into this area, and there's more intensive training opportunities that ODEN would offer, again, for those of you who are in Ontario or not. I'm sure there are equivalents in the different provinces. So I guess that would be my advice is yes, take that first, but then secondly, think about, do you even know who the employment service providers are in your community? And do you know what employment service providers do? And for those of you who don't know what they do, there are organizations that exist to really help provide job coaching, for example, for a young person, or not just a young person, for any person who has a disability who may require that little bit more support in order to be successful in employment, right? Do you know who they are in your community? So the DACT won't tell you who they are, but I think it'll lead you in the right direction. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer, for the question. My name's Connor Redinger, and one thing that I've noticed when we're hiring a part of equity and diversion and inclusion, we use what's the specific database that we use at the government? But we have a specific database that we actually pull candidates quite regularly. And one thing that we're really noticing is that, and this is a very important concept, is like once these students or once these young leaders enter the workforce, they have this lack of confidence. And that plays a critical role in developing and enhancing their skill set. So when you were talking about how people were setting that expectation so much lower about potentially even reading, right? Having that it destroys their confidence. So my question to you is, how do you increase that confidence? How do we as employers, or even how do we as from peer to peer increase that confidence so these people are able to really be back right up on their feet and we can help support them in getting these opportunities?
So many opinions about that. But, because to me, it's so layered and so interesting. And I think, again, the pandemic has played havoc on, and I can speak, that's with my university hat on. I can speak from the undergrad students that I've been meeting these last couple of years through, and the other side of the pandemic. They are just different in terms of the level of confidence they have. When I think with my disability hat on, 100% it goes back to home, I think. I truly, truly believe that. What are the expectations of that young person's life at home, and what's informing that? Now, let's even just think about your own biases and assumptions that you might hold about a person who has a disability, right? And, do that 1,000 times. And think of what that parent is experiencing in that moment when they find out that their child is going to have a disability and they're told to just forget your dreams. I was often told, you have to grieve the child that you didn't have. And I was like, pardon? I have a child. Why do people I really, really question that. But having said that, I totally get it. I totally get why it is scary to think about what is the future going to look like for my kid. But if we don't start changing that attitude at home, I don't think it's going to change elsewhere, right? And then the schools, we need to get schools thinking differently. And that was a beautiful part about this project. I loved speaking to schools because I had teachers coming up to me afterwards saying, it was really helpful to hear your perspective because it's going to help me think a little bit differently. And I was just like, yes, thank you, because they need to also have those higher expectations of the young people, but they also need to understand what the world that child is swirling around in, right? So I guess, to me, there's so many layers. I think there's the pandemic. I think there's the kind of online world that, young people live in now, and all of that weeds away at their confidence. But then with that disability hat on, I just think there's a negative narrative about disability, and we've got to challenge that narrative, right? I don't know if that answers your question, but there you have it.
Okay, I'm here. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. This is really close to my heart, too. So my background is academia. I was teaching at the university, and now I'm doing consulting, environmental sciences. So thank you again. I mean, I really still hasn't got over it's so the way you have passionately presented what you're doing is just beyond imagination. But my question to you is, as an environmental background, a consultant, so what are your expectations with what you're doing? What are your expectations from the world of environment, like the people like me who are consulting? I do, all the assessments and reclamation, remediation. That's what is my field. And so what do you expect from Eco-Canada? All those people who are here, what are your expectations? Because this is wonderful. And how do you think that, this can fit into the field of environment? So I hope I'm clear. I don't know how.
Oh, I love your question. I love your question.
I don't know how to explain, but I would love to have people like working for me, with me, not for me, with me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look,
so what do you think? I mean, how can you, I won't use that word, but fit in. But how would you expect to blend in?
What am I? What's the end game here? I totally get it. Look, and here's the thing: is that I've had a crash course in Eco-Canada over the last couple of months since I was invited to come here, and I've really been thinking deeply about it, and I'm so excited to be here and to learn about your industry, because it is not, my background is social work. It's very different to this, but what I would say to you is that, even from what I heard this morning, there were up on the stage, there was people from 4 different organizations, very different, university to oil to, exactly, to the Indigenous community. So within those places of work, if I can be as, boxy as that, there's got to be different roles that a young person who has a developmental disability might be able to fulfill, right? So, for example, if I can use young people who have autism as an example, we know that people who have autism are really, really good. One of their strengths is organization, right? Who's organizing the office, right? So who could do that job? One of the videos I sometimes show is of a young person who has, I believe it may be autism, I'm not sure, but she works in a veterinary clinic because she loves animals. The other thing I talk about in my thing is what's your passion, what are you interested in, and try and promote those. This young person is responsible for cleaning all of them and sterilizing all of the equipment used in surgery before for these animals. That's a really, really important role, right? So if this young person's capable and able of doing that, and that's a strength and an interest, why not? So I guess I would encourage you, what is it in your specific workplace that are different roles that are sometimes hard to fill, right? Because the other thing we know about people who have disabilities is they actually can be really darn good employees, right? There isn't the high turnover rate that you sometimes see with other people in industry, right? So are there roles that you think could be filled, by a person who doesn't have a PhD or who doesn't have a master's degree? Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I can tell you, if I can speak personally about my son, I don't know if he'll go to university, because at this point, people tell me he won't even get a high school diploma. That's another argument for another day. But my son can read. He can read really well. So I'm going to really push something for him that includes literacy, includes reading. Maybe he could work in a bookstore. Maybe he could work in the library. Think outside the box. So I guess what I would say is just continue to think outside the box.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can I add something to that? Could I add something to that?
We're all talking about DEI like it's new, and it's not. And we all want to be inclusive employers. An easy way to be an inclusive employer, besides hiring someone, is to make sure all your vendors have inclusive employee policies. Because they don't want to lose your contracts, right? But if they don't have a policy, they'll lose your contract. So why not make sure that every business that you do business with has a policy that they will hire inclusively? I mean, if we all think this way, before long, we won't have to have people like Jennifer. She's wonderful. She's wonderful. But people like Jennifer telling us that we need to hire, because everybody will be doing it.
Because I've already started thinking of, how I can, hire people, like that to work and help me. I've already started thinking about that. They're more responsible, because sometimes...
I appreciate the passion that is behind this conversation. I love every little bit, but we have a couple more questions to get through. And
for that, not me.
thank you very much.
Hi, just as an add-on, I come from the education background, so I'm an assistant professor and I teach students. So in a typical classroom in environmental science, interpersonal relationship is very important. And when you want to hire, so I have students in my class who are autistic, but the university doesn't have a way to cater for those students' need, and I worry as well. Sorry?
They don't have a way to support their needs?
Yeah, the only thing they have is maybe accessibility, where they say give them extra time for any assessment. But for an environmental science program, where you know that these students will proceed to work terms and stuff, there is need for those students to have access to work terms that are tailored to what their abilities are. And we don't have that. So maybe what that could be will be going to career services in those universities to say, I need students that are like this in this program, that have this, maybe that need this access. I will take those students. So, yeah.
Yeah, so just so I'm clear, what you're saying is there isn't necessarily the supports to support a person who has autism in order to do the work placement? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. See, I think that's unfortunate and wrong. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I appreciate you bringing that up, right? I mean, again, let's think outside the box. And people who have disabilities don't need help forever sometimes. Like, sometimes it's just let's just get those foundations out there. And this assumption that it's going to cost more and that it's more difficult, these things are actually not, they don't bear out in the facts and the stats. So thank you for raising that. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. My name is David. I run a non-profit organization for the youth, most especially like people of colors. And I discovered one of the problems is most time when we have community events, their parents find it difficult, to let them go. So I appreciate you bringing it to the employers, but what is the work, or what are you doing to get information to the parents or those that really need it? Because I think the first education starts from home.
Yes.
So I have organized a lot of programs for youth with disabilities or for youth. You see, most times they find it difficult to come out, learn or so what work are you doing, to get this education, this information to the grassroots of parents?
So curiosity, when you say the parents don't let them come, don't want them to come, can't get them there because of transportation, what's that about?
So what I mean is that most of them are not aware of maybe things like this. I know a family, the son has find it difficult to learn. Right? So I have tried as much as I can to support them.
Yeah.
But if I see something like this, I would have, recommend that family to you, to change the mindset of.
Yeah.
So maybe they're not aware. So what are you doing to get people to know more about like what you're doing so that more people can participate and benefit from it?
Okay, so thank you. Great question. I mean, again, the family workshops that I talked about in that first year of the project, we did deliver it to over 600 families in Ontario. So I did it to school boards. I went to a couple of parent information nights within school systems. So that was during that first year of the project. We did a podcast. You know, we did as much as we could in order to get the information out there about this workshop. And in the workshop gets at the very heart of what I think you're talking about there, which is how do we encourage parents to allow a level of risk, you know, for their child, right? Like send them to the workshop on their own. They don't need to come, right? So, but that's a level of risk that some parents are not so comfortable with, because again, I go back to, you know, the parents are told when their kids are young that they're fragile, right? So all of this gets, you know, swirled up in that. So we did that. The project that second year, which CASE has kindly funded us for, is that I've trained groups in Nova Scotia, Manitoba, and in British Columbia on how to deliver that workshop. And then the third thing is we've developed the LMS. So anybody could take that workshop, you know, where it really talks about changing those foundations. So I don't know, you know, sort of, maybe we can talk more afterwards about your specific organization. But
Like in Calgary, do you have any workshop yet in Calgary? Like
in Calgary, no, we don't. We
Okay.
don't. However, you could take the LMS. I can talk to you about that afterwards, for sure. 100%.
Sorry. I just thought I'd share a little bit of a personal anecdote as an employer. We've hired 17 interns, some including, I think, through the same program that you have under the YES. But one of the challenges I've had when actually coaching students and youth and disabled people for other positions is they quite often lack confidence because they've been rejected so many times. And I think that's one thing that is a big barrier, is that knocking down of the self-esteem. And some of them, they haven't recovered from it. Like, they just went back to just not searching for a job ever again. And that's really sad. And I have two family members, extended family, and so on, that have disabilities. And so I've seen like what they've gone through as well. And I was wondering, like, how do you kind of coach employers on, like, I think a big barrier on the employer side is the unknown unknowns. Like, I don't know what I'm getting when I bring on someone with a disability. Like, what am I committing to and for how long, and what's the experience going to be like? And I think a lot of employers just say no automatically because they don't know. And I was wondering how you address both sides of the equation, like trying to get that confidence up on the job seeker side with a disability, but also counteracting the employer's like fear of the unknown. So
do you work with any employment service providers in your area?
It's mostly through various employment programs in Canada. Like we've worked with Venture for Canada, IRAP. We're a partner of Eco Canada.
Yeah.
We've worked with some of the boot camps that do skills training. Probably about 7 or 8 different programs across the country.
Okay, because they may be able to help with the employee part. The employer part, I encourage you to have a look at the DACT. The other thing, and just, I mean, this is a very simple answer to, I think, a very complex question, and an excellent question, is, one might think about, this idea of rejection, right? We've all probably experienced rejection in our lifetime, right? We've all probably not got that one job that we applied for. So how do we help that person, understand that rejection is part of growth, right? And that's abstract and maybe not as concrete as a person, particularly who has a developmental disability, might think, right? So again, that for me, that comes down to how do we best understand how to support a person who has, if I can speak specifically about developmental disabilities. The other thing is, if it's a job interview, how are we conducting our job interviews, right? Quite frankly, if we have, again, this is from what I know about the disability of autism. If you have a person with autism in front of you, and one of the challenges that person has is social interactions, why are we interviewing them like that? Like, why don't we do this differently in order to pull out what that individual's strengths might be? And I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but I think it is a matter of, okay, this is not working, so what might work, and looking at alternatives. And the DACT may support you with that as an employer, and then sort of thinking about the employment service providers who may be in your community, what might they be able to provide you and provide the job seeker with support. I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope so. Kind
Yeah,
of.
that was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I just want to speak, I'm an employee with Gateway Association, which is a service provider for supportive employment in Alberta, here in Calgary. We are also part of CASE, the Canadian Supported Employment Network as well. And then there's also another part with that is, so all of the questions that are going here, that's something that Gateway can help you with. It's free of charge. We can offer these different things. There's also the JEDI, which is your Gateway to Equity, Division, and Inclusion, which works with employers to be able to develop these pieces. The other part too that CASE has come across that we've developed across the country since 2019 is mentorability. And mentorability is free of charge again, and it's a way of being able for employers to connect with people experiencing disabilities in a very low risk way. It could be an information session, it could be job shadowing, it could be a one-to-one mentorship, very short term. So generally it's about an hour. A lot of people end up really liking it and wanting to do it even more so. But it's also about that mutual mentorship. So it's not just in terms of like, hey, we're going to tell you about our industry and what's going on. It's also for the employers to have that opportunity to meet someone who's living with disabilities, to hear their story. Because a lot of the time it's like, I don't know you and I feel scared. So when you can have an opportunity to build those relationships and those connections, it makes a huge difference. And there's multiple service providers across Alberta. I'm very happy to connect. And thank you for all your information. And actually, ODEN is also part of CASE and also part of the Mentorability Network. And as a parent, and actually as an individual living with disability, I appreciate this very much.
I think that's going to be our last question for this session. I'd like to extend a big thank you to everybody that has attended. For any other questions, CASE actually has a booth at the front. They're very happy to help anybody that has any further interest into trying to go back to their workplace or their industry with a different perspective and you know, move towards some improvement. Please help me give a big thank you for Dr. Crowson.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.